We begin the news at this hour in West Africa, where Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has announced the cancellation of the automatic deduction of 40% from the internally generated revenues of federal universities. Now, the president spoke on Friday at an ongoing 75th Founders' Day ceremony of the University of Ibadan, represented by the Minister of Education, Tahir Mamman. The president says the policy implementation was ill-timed. He says this is not the best time for such policy, since universities are struggling. The president also pledged his commitment to the reform of the nation's education sector as the bedrock for national development. Now, Dr. Peter Ogudoro, an education researcher, joins me for more on this. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Peter.
It's my pleasure to join you.
All right, great. Now, how do you think the cancellation of the automatic deduction of 40% from the internally generated revenues of federal universities by Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu will impact the financial autonomy of these institutions?
Well, certainly it was preposterous for anybody to have actually come up with such an idea that you deduct, 40% of universities IGR, when we know that the higher education system in Nigeria has been grossly underfunded for decades. And then the little money they're making, you say you want to take 40% of that. So what the president had done is very reasonable, it's commendable, but more importantly, nobody should have even thought about it at all, because the little money that comes into the covers of universities should be used to do the basic things that they need to do. But those of us who do research in this space globally know that the kind of money the universities are getting, even when they combine their internal generated revenue, adding that to the subventions coming from governments that own them, those things do not really amount to up to even 40% of the money they need to be able to run properly as universities in a modern society. So for the people operating in government space to have thought about this kind of idea certainly means that we are still groping in the dark as policymakers, and I find that very unfortunate.
I mean, my next question, of course, has to do with measures that, of course, educationalists recommend to ensure the federal universities can sustain themselves financially without relying on automatic deduction of 40% from the internally generated revenues. However, I'd also appreciate if you can give us an idea, maybe in specifics, how much an average, say maybe federal university makes. It could be monthly, maybe annually. So one can have an idea of what we're looking at.
Well, that's difficult to say across board, because the location of the university has a lot to do with how much money they can make. So universities in Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Lagos are the ones that are blessed in terms of having the capacity to generate money on their own. But the ones that are located in the other places really are not as lucky as these ones that I have mentioned. Lagos is the most lucrative university in Nigeria, because you know that Lagos controls about 40% of Nigeria's economy. And most of the people who want to go to school and still work, they all live here. All the banks have their headquarters here. All the oil companies have their headquarters here. All the multinational corporations have their headquarters here. And so there's money in Lagos. And so if you run a higher institution in Lagos, you have access to money. Even Ibadan is not as UI is not as lucky as Lagos is. So we can't. There's no one size fits all. Most of universities in Nigeria are struggling to make money. They are not scratching the surface at all. So don't let anybody deceive you into thinking that is something significant.
But how about the issue of accountability in terms of how these funds are actually utilized? I mean, who does the university report to? I mean, we know that you said Lagos, for instance, makes money. Is there any sort of checks and balances to ensure that these monies that are made by these universities are utilized judiciously? I mean, how does that happen? And also, how might the cancellation of the deduction affect the overall financial stability and development of federal universities in Nigeria? And what strategies can be implemented to mitigate the potential negative consequence of this?
Well, universities are properly constituted places. They are not proprietorships. And so the money that comes into their coffers goes into an account that you can withdraw money from only through following appropriate procedures. They have professional accountants who manage their finances. And so when students pay money, that money goes into a central account, which you cannot withdraw money from unless you meet minimum requirements. No doubt, sometimes when they do maybe like distance learning programs or run some workshops and seminars, we may not be absolutely sure that all the money coming in through those kinds of events and programs get into the university coffers. But I think most universities, especially those ones that are owned by the federal government, have also got to a level where virtually every dime that comes into their coffers enters the right accounts. And you can't take that money out unless you meet minimum requirements in terms of obtaining appropriate signatures. And those signatures are not cannot come to you unless you satisfy the authorities involved that there's a need, which you will use that money to meet. But going beyond that, to try to answer the question, how do we become more self-reliant as higher educational institutions in Nigeria? The only way to go, really, is to first empower the universities before we can start asking them to make money. We haven't empowered them enough. Their laboratories are not adequately equipped to do research for industry. In the advanced societies, some of us who have been privileged to study in places like Norway, UK, etc., we know that universities run laboratories that do research for industry, and they make a lot of money because when industry has a problem, they know that the right place to go to look for solution is in the average tower. But that's not our case in Nigeria, because most organizations in Nigeria even seem to have better laboratories than universities that are supposed to be operated at a higher level, can boast of. So we haven't equipped them. So if you want universities to become self-reliant, equip their laboratories, train them so that they can acquire the capacity to be able to do proper research, which can add value to industry, from where a lot of money can come by way of grants and money that supports sustainable research and innovation and development. And that's where a lot of money comes into universities in the advanced, in the advanced society. But here, we haven't empowered them. They haven't got the skills. They haven't got the equipment. They haven't got the technology. Okay. And they haven't got the enabling environment. Even electricity is something they're struggling with, and they haven't got access to reliable internet access. So in the absence of all of this, asking them to fund themselves amounts to, placing the cart before the horse. It's not going to work.
Okay, I'm sorry, I may just need to, of course, sort of disagree with you slightly on one of your assertions, but briefly, I would appreciate if you can respond. I've had conversations with some senior academicians, and they've told me, some of them have said that some of these universities, actually in terms of equipment, do have well, I call it science gadgets and all of that, but some of them are stored up and only brought out on special days. Maybe when a VIP, government VIP is visiting, they just, show it off and then they lock it back up. So I still go back to the question of accountability. We know that there is a part of, yes, they need to be funded, they need to be further financed, they need to be trained. But how do we also ensure that these universities also deliver on their part? What are those parameters that you feel the government and also the private society can do to ensure accountability on their part? Because I believe it's a two-way street.
Yeah, we say this all the time, but you see, I think we're expecting too much from people who have not empowered. That's the truth of the matter. If you do research in the industry, you will know that our universities are, many of them are, glorified secondary schools. I tell you, there are some secondary schools in this country that have better equipped laboratories compared to universities, laboratories that you see around. So, and when you say they lock up the equipment and they bring them out only when maybe National Universities Commission officials come for inspection. Yes, I know that happens, but what that person didn't tell you also is that many of the universities also go and borrow equipment from industry. and display them when they know that inspectors are coming from National Universities Commission. And once they get their courses accredited, those equipment are returned to the places where they borrowed them from. That one is also a fact of life, which the person who spoke with you didn't mention. But more critically, we haven't also been able to equip universities to a level that they can have, for example, an enabling environment that enables them to keep the equipment in place all the time. For example, you don't have UPS in most of the places, and we know electricity is decrepit in our country. And so, if you leave those things in the hands of students and nobody oversees them, and you haven't trained these students well, they will even be stolen, because a lot of the students you have these days are coming from very poor homes and with poor culture. So even the things you have put in place to train them, some of them will still go and sell. And that's why they lock them up, because we haven't got a proper culture that makes students know that the things that are in place to help them to learn and acquire skills to prepare them for good careers are things they shouldn't tamper with, are things they shouldn't steal, are things they shouldn't destroy. And so I do not think that is misplaced for universities to try and protect equipment in their care and then bring them out only when they are absolutely in need of them, by way of, for example, using them to train the children. That's the way to look at it. That's the reality of our society. This place is a different kettle of fish. It's not like what you find in the advanced societies, where you can trust all the stakeholders to recognize that the things that are in place are there to help them. We haven't got to that level yet. Our culture is not a culture that promotes excellence. It's not a culture that promotes social responsibility. It's not a culture that demonstrates that, see, what is meant to help you is something you shouldn't destroy.
Okay, Dr. Ogudoro Peter, thank you so much for your time. An education researcher. Thank you once again.
My pleasure.